All right.
Oh, I can hear you. You got it.
Anytime I would enter into my Zoom classroom, or I'd get kicked off and then I'd enter into my Zoom classroom when I was taking classes last fall and spring, my computer would do a cool little chime where it was like recording in process. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. That was not as fun, but it was fun nonetheless. So hi everyone, I'm Charlotte Crofton. I'm a second-year Master of Divinity student at Candler School of Theology. Hopefully you all semi-recognize my face. If not, I apologize. I've tried to get in front of the congregation as much, but if you have kiddos especially, you've probably seen me fairly regularly. And it's actually very interesting. I walked in, Matt goes, do you know what's gonna happen? It's like, not particularly. I mean, I know I have stuff prepared. I hope it's over James 3. And Matt was like, well, Brian will get up, announcements, somebody will pray, and then you have like 30 minutes of time to fill. And in my head, I'm like, oh, 30 minutes? I've just spent the past, 4 years of undergrad learning how to speak in quick, concise, 5-minute increments. So we'll see how long and how well this goes today. Who knows, maybe since I've said that, I'll actually speak for far longer than I should, but I'm mindful of the time. Andy will wave his hands at me if I'm going too crazy. So I think first what I want to say about getting to this point where I get to speak to you all about James is when I noticed that Phil, that we were going to be studying James, I made the offhanded comment to Phil. It's like, I really love the book of James. Yes, rookie mistake. Phil was like, well, hey, do you want to, talk about this? It's like, sure. And then he gave me James 3. And James 3 talks about taming the tongue. And it can be a little frustrating. I've heard James 3 talked about a lot. And everybody always has a kind of interesting sort of understanding of the bridle in the horse's mouth and the rudder and all of these things. And I was just so enthused to be able to first look at James 3. But then as I got into it and I realized, oh, we're talking about building community, I got more and more excited about the fact that we'd be able to study this together this morning. So would you all turn to James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, or you can turn your attention to the screen, whatever you prefer. And I will read James chapter 3. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives or grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. Thanks, Phil, for James chapter 3. It's very, the irony was not lost on me when the very first few verses say, not all of you should be teachers. And I always chuckle at that because it seems so interesting coming from someone who is a teacher. And I feel though it's very funny coming from someone who's studying to sort of be a teacher and who hasn't quite felt like she stepped into this role as teacher yet. But you know, here we are. And I guess I have title of teacher today. So hopefully this goes well. But before we sort of get into what I want to talk about today, I would like to know how some of you have heard James chapter 3 talked about. So in the past, how have you heard James chapter 3 talked about? Anyone want to share?
I don't know if I remember what I remember from the past, but it draws me back to like the beginning of this chapter. We talked about being slow to speak, slow to anger. As I can kind of hear it telling me, you know, don't just jump out and say whatever's in your mind. You know, make sure that you think about it first. That's what came to my mind here. Slow to speak. Slow to anger.
Yeah, the connection of slow to speak, slow to anger, and then this sort of like watching how you speak. It was not lost on me either. That's kind of one of my favorite sort of observations to make from that. Anyone else?
Just watch your words, and you know the saying always: if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. But you know that's not.
Andy's now going to put you on the spot.
For folks online.
Okay.
If you would repeat.
Oh, okay.
Or you can use the microphone. Thank you.
Okay. So we'd had the relation to slow to speak, slow to anger. And then we had the just watching what you say. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Anyone else want to share?
Is it this part of scripture where
Is it this part of scripture or another part of the New Testament where it talks about, or maybe Proverbs or something, where it talks about the tongue can do more damage than, like, I forgot the similarity, but you know, that any other, you know, catastrophe you can imagine, something like that. But that's basically what I get from it, is that it can do not just damage, but irreparable type harm.
It's interesting that you bring up Proverbs, considering as you continue on in James 3, then you get to the talks of 2 types of wisdom, which will be next week, right, Phil? Yeah. So I think it's very interesting you bring that up. I'm not exactly sure where that would be, but it feels as though it's on par with what's mentioned here. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right, that's fine. So the way that I've sort of heard a lot of James 3 talked about is this heavy focus on taming the tongue. So if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Watch what you're saying. And sort of this understanding of how the tongue sort of denotes your action, right? The tongue sort of tells you where you're going, or how the rudder of the ship, you know, directs your movement. So directs where you're going next. And then there's that very small part in, but no one can tame the tongue. But in that sense, it's its own challenge of taming the tongue. So the challenge of taming your tongue, taming the untamable. And then there's this whole sort of like more individual sort of accountability that the book of James holds people to, is that you should watch and you should focus on what you were saying, what you were doing, noticing how your words relate to your actions, how your actions relate to your words. And this has been this sort of very heavy, in my experience with this text, been this very individual, sort of introspective, heavy sort of stance that says, you need to watch what you say, you need to watch what you do, because the tongue is powerful. And that is absolutely one way you can look at this text. But today, the way that I want us to look at this text is it should be the side that says thesis. You can tell them in seminary by titling a slide that says thesis. And my thesis for our session today is that James 3 is a framework for holy community. And there we go. We keep working through it. Almost there. I got a little carried away with the animations on the text boxes. I noticed that Phil does that, and I was like, okay, I have permission to do that. So there's our slide. Thesis, James 3 as a framework for holy community. And we're talking about building community. But what I want to sort of set apart is we're not just talking about the community of the church. We're talking about the communities that you're a part of. We're talking about, whether that's work, family, Sunday school classes, whatever it is, community in any sense. We're seeing we're understanding the traits of a holy community. What makes up a holy community and how James 3 sort of provides that insight and information for us. So holy community in James 3, it'll be on our next slide, is a purposefully cultivated community. It's an intentionally maintained community, and it's a continually lived community. So purposefully cultivated, intentionally maintained, and continually lived. All right, so community is purposefully cultivated. So if we were to look back at James 3 verses 1 through 4, these will be on the slides as well. We will see this sort of necessary need. How many of you have ever ridden a horse? How many of you know about like the whole idea of taming a horse? Okay, so if I don't know what I'm talking about, only 2 of you know. So the way that I understand how you would tame a horse is there has to be some sort of element of trust, right? There has to be some sort of element, whether that's before, I guess, the horse is broken in or not, but there's some element of trust. It's where the horse has established a relationship with the person who is, in a sense, going to be guiding and moving it through life. I think I've gotten that much. And there has to be a certain element of trust before the bits go in the mouth and before the horse's mouth is bright, right? And the same thing goes for the pilot of the ship. There has to be a certain element of trust, not only with the pilot of the ship to that rudder, but just the basic fact that there's going to be, that the ship's going to do what it's supposed to do, right? So when we look at community as something that is purposefully cultivated, we first have to start with trust. Establishing a place of trust where someone can walk into a room and not feel threatened, or that there's another ulterior motive, just the fact that you were there. Community is based on trust. You can't get the bits in the horse's mouth without trust. And if you want to help someone pilot the ship, well, there has to be trust there too, especially if it's a giant, even if it's a small boat and somebody's going to say, hey, I want you to drive my boat. There has to be a certain element of trust first. I've been on enough boats to know that when I, as a young kid, was put on somebody's lap to steer the boat, their hands are right there because they couldn't fully trust me. But when we take over that steering of the boat, there's a certain element of trust that's been given to you. And that's what community is. Community is a place of trust. Because bridling a horse, helping pilot a ship, it involves trust. There's a necessity for trust, a necessity for a loving kindness of spirit that says, I just want to sit with you as you pilot this ship. Or I just want to watch you tame this horse. And then maybe I could help you. And that's what happens in any sort of holy community, is there's this basis of trust to which you enter into community saying, I want to be someone who people can trust, and I want to trust others. So it's an action on both sides. Community is purposely cultivated specifically in trust. Now, the second point, community is intentionally maintained. So this, we can look at James chapter 3, verses 5 through 9. And I want to read this out. This is by far my favorite section of the James text, looking at James 3 as a holy community. So I'm going to read this and then we'll break it down a little bit. So also the tongue is a member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. So anytime there's a discussion about fire in any capacity, my mind sort of immediately jumps to this context of the wildfires that are out west, or the wildfires last year that were literally all over Australia. For me, that's just kind of where my brain will sort of immediately go, is this sort of like kind of instant panic and nervousness about the fact that like the world could be on fire. And then I'm able to calm myself down and move on. You know, that's life. But this idea that the tongue could set things on fire, this idea that the tongue is that powerful to start a fire. And then, of course, it leads me to thoughts about, well, how could the tongue put the fires out? Could the tongue put the fires out? And it leads to sort of all sorts of questions. And then I further think about, well, how do we put fires out? Why do fires start in the first place? And this is where we get to this sort of wonderful sort of juxtaposition between community as fire prevention or community as fire suppression. Because we all know that regardless of our intentions, our motives, sometimes something that we say comes out wrong, or we're having a rough day and we're talking to somebody, they say something and we're just so frustrated that it flies off the tip of our tongue, and boom, there it is. We've just really hurt someone. And it happens. I mean, after all, James chapter 1 says, slow to speak and slow to anger. It doesn't say don't be angry. So sometimes it just happens, right? The fire spills off of our tongues. But what community does is community has the opportunity to serve in two roles, either fire prevention or fire suppression. So I looked up the difference between those two. I actually got into an interesting sort of Google search about like forest fires and underbrush, because I know that underbrush is a big thing that can contribute to forest fires, and then so can like your campsites, and that's what Smokey the Bear talks about. And a lot of funding is put towards, you know, fire suppression, but because so much money is put towards fire suppression, it's not necessarily put towards fire prevention. So what is fire suppression? Well, fire suppression is putting the fire out. It's throwing anything and everything on the fire to put it out. That's fire suppression. We want the fire gone. The fire's already started, so we want the fire gone. But what about fire prevention? Does anyone want to guess what fire prevention is?
Not allowing it to start.
Not allowing it to start. It's fire prevention. And it's this sense that it says for a forest fire, it would mean that people are there to clear out the underbrush. It would mean that if there would be a small controlled burn, like there in some cases are, although they can get out of hand, which I learned. But you're preventing the big forest fires, because we know that a fire is inevitable. Smokey the Bear shakes his head in shame because well, we don't always put our campfires out, or maybe there's a spark that blows some way or the other, but there's always going to be a fire. But the matter of community is, how big is that fire going to get? Our role in community is to be fire suppressors? No. Our goal in community is to be fire preventers, knowing that there's a chance that people we come into contact with, they can be speaking fire off their tongue. But how can we prevent them from getting to that point? How can we walk in loving kindness? How can we walk in the fruit of the Spirit with these people, with our friends, with our family, with our coworkers, to where we can help prevent the fire, the magnitude of the fire? Almost be ready to be, and almost be able to see when the fire will happen. So that way we're prepared. Maybe it means taking a shift of clearing the underbrush. What exactly that looks like, I'm not sure for you. For me, it would be a weekly, for some of my friends, it would be a weekly check-in. I'm clearing out the underbrush weekly, just checking in, wanting to know what's going on, what's happening there. But as community, which is intentionally maintained, it means that we are intentionally stepping into a role where we are fire preventers. Because we know the danger when a fire gets to the point where it just needs to be suppressed. So community is intentionally maintained, where we take a shift to clear the underbrush, to adequately focus and figure out, how can I keep this situation from becoming a full-blown forest fire? Because, well, if fire comes off the tongue, it's going to be inevitable. And then we can move to community that is continually lived. So community is a continual process. At some point, as I was preparing this, I got to the Wesleyan thought of community in terms of Christian perfection. You know, we're continuing forward on towards perfection. And we're continually maintaining, cultivating, establishing, living into a relationship with God, with Christ, with the Holy Spirit, and becoming more and more perfect as we continue on. And that's community. It's continually running into grace, whether that's the grace that others have extended towards us or the grace that we've extended towards others. But community is continually lived. And what that also means is that we keep doing 1 and 2. We keep purposefully cultivating community. We keep intentionally maintaining community. It's not just a one and done. It's a very cyclical nature where it's almost a switch between 1 and 2. And that's overall sort of this continually lived community. And this comes from James 3:9-12. And I would like to call our attention to verse 10. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. So I didn't look at the Greek of this verse, but something that stood out to me is the "this ought not to be so." Usually when I have heard this passage, it can be very heavy on sort of how we have fallen short. And the some ways that I've heard it talked about, it's missed out on the grace that this specific verse extends to us and to others. This ought not to be so. This should not be the case. This doesn't say it would not be the case, or it will not be the case, or it could not be the case, but this shouldn't be the case. This shouldn't be the way that it is, but it is. It shouldn't be that we can bless the Lord with our tongue, but also curse the Lord with our tongue, but it is. It shouldn't be that we can speak fire, but also speak blessing, but it is. This happens to be the case. But what I think that this verse shows is it's a call to grace that exists in community. It's a verse that says, yes, you were very upset and you said some very hurtful things, but I will look and see what's going on. Hopefully this isn't a repeated behavior, but if it is, then I'm going to walk with you. We're going to figure this out. It's a continual call and reflection of grace, to extend grace to our brothers and sisters, because this ought not to be so. This isn't how the Lord intended it to be. But because we failed to love God, love ourselves, love others, it is so. But it's ought not how it should be. It should not be this way, but sadly, it is. We can't all be perfect. We can't all never be angry. We can just be slow to anger. So community is continually lived. It's lived into this ought not to be so, but sometimes it happens. So what do you do in response? And that's what's very powerful of the ought not, the should not. It shouldn't be this way, but sometimes it is. So community means reflecting upon the ought nots and the should nots and believing in the what should be, and coming from a place of grace that we extend to ourselves, we extend to others, and that we let ourselves step into when others extend it to us as well. But community is this continual process of grace, of cultivation, of maintaining, and it's all purposefully and fully lived. So with that, I have some discussion questions for us. Where are you cultivating community? Could be at the church, it could be in your neighborhoods. I really have no idea. I know I'm trying to cultivate community in a Candler classroom, as well as at church, specifically with our kiddos right now. But where are you cultivating community? How are you maintaining community? What steps are you taking? Are you taking steps? I had to stop and think, maybe I'm not taking any steps. Maybe I'm not maintaining community. Maybe I'm trying to create community, but I'm not doing anything to maintain community. But how are you maintaining community? And then are you living into this sort of framework of community that we've laid out? These three aspects of purposefully cultivating community, intentionally maintaining community, and continually living into community. And then would you like to add anything? I always love it when a professor or somebody says, what would you add? Granted, most of the time I'm like, I have no idea. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. But if there's anything here, what would you like to add? And then the final question being, how might we continue to live into a purposed and life-giving community? Maybe we've already answered it with the earlier questions, but how can we continue to live into a community that's aware that sometimes we speak fire, but we're also people who can prevent them? That is all I have, and I think I'm a little under the 30 minutes, but I made good time. And I was told that y'all would break yourselves up into groups.
We will.
Well, awesome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let's use the round tables that are already set up. We can probably do, looks like 2 or 3 groups today.
Hey guys. I'll put the questions into the chat. And I'll break it into groups.
Thank you.
See what we got.
Discussion.
And we've got 6
Broken down
folks
to 2
here.
tables instead of.
So we'll just do one big group. How about that? How about we just all stay here?
Very well done.
I don't
Thank
see a lot of faces, so I'm not
Yeah,
sure
I
if you guys are
appreciate
there.
the offer. It turned,
Mute the main room. We just stay here, guys. So we're not going to breakout rooms. We're just gonna stay here. I see Carol and Martha are here. That's nice. Morning, guys. Hey, Bo.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning. All right, so I'm gonna ask for someone to lead. Who wants to lead today?
I can.
Okay, Johnny, did you get the questions?
Yes, well, the way I got them is I do a safety valve here. I
Yeah,
always take them on my camera,
fire prevention.
you know. And so where are you?
Cultivating community.
Okay, let me get my glasses. Where are you cultivating community? How about right here where we are? But somebody give me we've got some fantastic brains on the screen, so let's talk. Anybody got are you involved in something that you're cultivating community?
So I'll say for me, it's nice coming to this event and being able to see people in different, we'll say, generations, right? So most of the community we cultivate at school or at church,
Thank
right,
you,
is
Bob.
very much focused on the, you know, the stage of life we're in. So having any opportunity to kind of, I say, branch out, right, and see other people from other phases of life is good.
Hey, Bo, my brother would have called that you're visiting the land of the near deads.
Fran, was that visiting the land of near death?
Oh, the near deads, near
Near
deads.
Let's go to the other side of this. How about Cub Scouts? I've been seeing Cub Scouts on like a lot of different areas. I think that's something that Mark and I have done to cultivate community and that scouting journey, and starts with now kindergartners. The first grade was what it was when my kids started.
Yeah.
I think it's the outside organizations you're involved with too. I mean, it's easy to think of church and this group, et cetera, but you know, if you're on a board, if you're involved with some kind of ministry outside the church, I think that probably is, you know, we all have our regular groups, if you will. It's a question of if we're branching out and doing new and different things. You know, you look at some of the stuff that when Mark Muddleman talks about, you can go work down at that location down south of the city. We've had a bunch of guys go down there. So something new and different, I think, not the same old, like I've been in the same Sunday school class forever, for lack of a better term. So I think the new and different part is also important.
For a while, I think they also were trying to get us outside our Sunday school classes and join at least quarterly. And again, obviously this is pre-pandemic, but they were trying to get people outside their normal Sunday school classes to have mixers, you know, once a quarter or et cetera. It was fun because we would go to those things and people would still congregate around their old Sunday school class. So I'm not sure it worked exactly the way they intended, but it's that idea to put yourself outside and form that sense of community. And as Bo started off saying, you know, obviously we have a mix of people here. You know, I hope that, you know, to make the barbecue or the tailgate in a couple of weeks. And I think that'll be a mix of, you know, people and folks and classes, et cetera. And Fran, you and I have worked on committees and things like that where we had, you know, everybody from, as you call them, the near dead, which, you know, on down to, you know, very new people. And obviously this morning we had, you know, an intern from Candler speaking to us. And it's, you know, again, it's sometimes you have to pay a little, you know, maybe a little bit more attention or clear, trying to say, okay, how exactly is this message motivating us? But again, it kind of exposes us to that broader community, which I think is so important.
Yeah, I had an experience earlier this year. I became the mayor of my homeowner association.
I'm sorry.
Many of you have done this, but my State of the Union back in January was, how can we be more kind to one another? Because there've been gossip issues. And boy, it can just ruin a small community. And I have been so proud of this community this year. I think they intentionally do not gossip as much as they did in the past. People have gone to each other and asked forgiveness from each other on their own, you know. It just makes you feel good about your community. And it's something though, that sometimes we have to kind of set the framework for what a community should be to get them to think about how they should act. So it'll be interesting come next January, February, when I hand over the gavel to another person to get the feedback from the community as to how they felt like it went themselves.
An awesome responsibility today. If you're in a position of leadership and trying to work in a community that is trying to isolate because of some greater fear or unknown, there's a group, y'all may not be aware of it, but us older seniors have a primetime group, and Ann and I are on the council, and we meet by Zoom, and we were following along in our path of what we've done in the past. And one of the things that we looked at and we're seriously on track to organize was a trip up into North Georgia where we charter a bus and we go up there to the apple orchard and see the leaves, and it's an act of community of socializing. And the latest or the most revised data about where we are in the pandemic, it came to a discussion that we should be cautious. We're among the portion of the population that is the center of the bullseye. We already have health issues that we deal with. I'm personally more afraid of falling than I am of COVID, but it's still something that you have to be bring into your present day thinking and leadership. And it the idea of having the responsibility of organizing a group of people to community to socialize is an awesome responsibility. And in the present threat of COVID, we need to be cautious as to how we socialize. Anyway, that you are, each of you are a leader in a group of people. You're responsible for guiding that group. We've got a different community that we live in right now with the threat of serious health conditions, mostly for the elderly, it seems. So,
you know, Johnny, most of us, I'm on this board, and most of the board members are all, I'll be kind, over the age of 50. Okay. And we were talking about what you're talking about with COVID. And I think it's very easy when we're in groups of, Bo, I guess I address this to you, when we're in groups of our own peers, if you will,
right,
is to see everything through the lens of our peer group. And the question came up about how many of these particular staff members on this organization have been vaccinated. And I believe that there's a large majority of us on this call, older people think everybody ought to be vaccinated, right? Well, I will tell you that people anywhere from 25 to 45 to 50, particularly women, particularly minorities, have concerns about fertility and some of these other issues that most of us have. It's a distant memory. Okay. So my point being this, it's very easy when we're in the groups of our peers to think that everybody's on certain things are on the same page. Or even in our own groups that we assume everybody's vaccinated. Okay, everybody's not vaccinated, folks, but we make these assumptions because of the majority or the super majority of the group. So I think the beauty of this is that when we have groups of different age groups, et cetera, we get all different perspectives. And I think that's something all of us need to be conscious of as we go forward. You really see that if you ever attend a church council meeting, and which we now have actual dialogue in our church council meetings, which we didn't used to have years ago. I see Mark McElroy laughing at that one, but I think it's something to be, the sense of community. Community just isn't your age group, I guess is what I'm trying to say when it's all said and done.
And maintaining it takes that interaction, you're saying, right, Fran and John?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to be cognizant of that and remember that the world that I come from can be a lot different from somebody else's world 10, 15, 20, 25 years younger than myself, or 30. And it sort of frustrates me that I sit here politically and think, my God, we're coming to the end of the world in a lot of areas, no matter what you're Republican or Democrat, that it's all totally shook up. And yet I look around and see young people, 45, 50, they don't seem to be concerned about it at all. And I probably wouldn't have been concerned about it either if I hadn't been in politics. So, it's just sort of interesting. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Depending where you are in your life, Bo, for example, people with young children, they're more, do I got to drive on a soccer tournament to go to Jacksonville, Florida this weekend versus the state of the world? That's all. I've rambled enough.
I thought her presentation was very good. I had forgotten how rich those verses are right in there. But I remember I was Bo, I was a very young man in an older man's group 30 years ago. And an older guy, he's probably my age now. He said about taming the tongue, he would say, if someone was being gossipy or talking about somebody else, he would always say, but gosh, Fran, he sure could whistle. He would always think of something positive, but he used that line almost all the time. But gosh, he could whistle. There was good aspects to that person that you may have not realized. And I thought that was one memory I had. That thing about the tongue, gosh, to me, it's like if you could tame your tongue, it's the beginning of transformation. Is that kind of heavy? But it's like if you can't tame the tongue, how can you ever be transformed into what Christ expects us to be? There was a saying years ago, not a saying, I forgot who, it's on his grave, called the trim tab effect. Any of you pilots out there or boaters, but the trim tab is the part of a rudder or a plane's wing. The slight deviation can make a difference. In other words, the whole wing doesn't have to dip. Just the trim tab can change. So it's a beginning. If we could change our tongue, it's a trim tab effect on our whole way of thinking. We don't have to totally change. Even a slight change in the way we respond or speak can have a transforming effect on the way we live. Someone had taught me that years ago, and I think I have to apply it to myself first, because between me and my wife, I'm sure I'm the one that needs to tame the tongue. I know that y'all don't have that issue, but
I want to inject something here. In a state of chaos where tongues are blazing, and in today's environment, there's plenty of chaos, tragedy, horrible events taking place. And for us to try and tame our tongue, and this too will pass, somewhere up there, you need to voice your voice against the chaos. Or get out of the way and let the chaos finally kill itself down somehow. There is life after the fire, the forest fire. Okay. So I just simply raise it as a thought. When when you're in a battle for sanity, are you supposed to tame your tongue then too?
You could walk away.
No, but you're in a community that is in chaos.
Yeah.
You're going to walk away?
And many times I think it's that, you know, the chaos exists because one party or another feels they're not being heard. And so sometimes taming the tongue may be not immediately responding, but listening enough to say, I think this is what you're saying. I may disagree with that, but I think this is what you're saying. By the way, I wish I could do these things myself, but you know, the idea that, you know, you recognize the other person's right to have an opinion, I guess, and say, well, that's interesting. You know, I never looked at it that way, or you know, what planet are you from? No, you can't. But say, you know, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, or that's interesting. I see it differently. And then sometimes that opens up a little bit more community than, you know, what we tend to have today is people shouting at each other and nobody's listening.
Mark, that's Brian McLaren uses that, the author. He says, gee, I never thought of it that way. Let's talk about it later. In other words, to diffuse the situation. He said, I'd like to sit down and have a good conversation about that subject later on, but to diffuse the heat at the moment.
I think part of the issue though today is now we take a comment in a discussion and a lot of times out of context. And that's what people focus on. I've been a victim of that, for lack of a better word, when I was in politics. I still remember my daughter used to tell her mother, "It's okay, Mom, you can read the local paper today. Dad didn't say anything." So, but you do have to be very careful of when you hear something. If you're not a party to the entire conversation, the world today is truly sound bites. Someone can be all through a speech or all through something, and they focus on this one thing without knowing where the state of where it was said. And that's what sometimes we only hear what we want to hear or do not want to hear and focus on that versus the broad scheme. More so what you said, Mark. I hadn't thought of that. Right? I don't know how many of you ever heard this young lady preach her sermon at our church. Anybody heard her sermon when she preached that one week? Mm-hmm. She preached, I believe, 1 week. We had an intern come in from Canada speaking. I would believe it was her. And she was unbelievable. Okay. And I think that was her. So this young lady's got quite a bright future. We're very blessed to have had her there today.
Absolutely.
I want to see if I can get us to another question here. How are you maintaining community, or are you living this framework of community? Maybe we've been discussing that. Has this been an open discussion?
Well, I want to live into it and see if Bob or Jim have anything to say, to see if, we could bring them into it.
Hey, Nathan, I did notice community today that Bob was a little late to the meeting this morning, but I didn't want to say anything.
Well, I'm glad you didn't gossip about that anywhere else.
Actually, I was there. I couldn't get my camera working.
Oh.
No, I didn't. I do think it's fascinating, though, because we have all these overlapping communities that each one of us belongs to. I have my community of family, I have my community at the church, I have my community at work, I have my community of different friends, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they're very separated. And I think that my wife is awful telling me to quiet my tongue because I might say something which provides my opinion which may conflict with other people. James will agree to that one. And I think we have to be very careful in both ways, in many ways, that that we are quick to listen and slow to speak. But then not be, Fran, I know that you would agree with this, but not be afraid of speaking. Because if you are too self-censoring, that's also harmful. You know, I as an attorney, I've had some clients say things which are totally inappropriate, and I have no problem saying to them, you know, you're not allowed to speak like that around me. I can't control how you speak when you're not with me, but when you're around me, that's not appropriate. And I don't want you to do it. So I think, you know, we have to be aware of our communities and be respectful, but not fearful.
I would just say, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I mean, I think I've just been listening. I think they're great comments. I love what Johnny was talking about. And I think Mark's comments are good. And as I was looking at this question, are you living into it, is to kind of step back and say, what does that mean? And it's creating an environment, as Bob talked about, that is everybody has the right to speak, and everybody has the obligation to be polite, to listen. And how do you do that? And you know, you model it. How do you critique and calm down? And I like Bob's comments in terms of if you're going, you know, that is not a helpful comment, whether it's a comment or whether it's how it's spoken. You know, and that has to do with maybe the loudness of when somebody's making a comment. Just have to be respectful. Everybody has the same right to chat and share their opinions, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, what
Nathan,
Bob
we need to hear from Bo, Nathan.
Yeah, you're right. Good point, Fran.
I kicked us off, but no, I mean, I agree. I think what Jim said makes a lot of sense. I'd say, you know, even at my age, right, young kids, maintaining community these days is tough with COVID, and you know, a lot of people are concerned about, you know, elderly parents and things like that. So they're also kind of, you know, being somewhat cautious, right? And so it's tough because, I mean, as great as technology is, it doesn't replace our ability to kind of get together, fellowship, have a meal together. So I'm glad we do have opportunities to do that within the church and outside. But no, and I've been fairly quiet here, trying to listen more than I speak. So enjoy the conversation.
Well, you made up for it, Bo, because Andy put you on the big screen while you were speaking, so everybody had a good chuckle. But no, it was good. You're looking good. Now we're all up there, so we're all laughing.
It's I love this question, and the idea of bringing up the fact that community involves a level of trust.
Sorry to do that to you, but
I don't think we think of that as much, but you trust your neighbor to take care of their property. You trust all kinds of ways, and it was a great lesson this morning. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to what we've said?
I think we're ready to go.
It's a newfangled thing. We noticed you didn't even take the plastic off. All right, well, I hope everyone had a great discussion. If you guys would be so kind as to join me in thanking Charlotte for stepping into a room full of guys. We had a great lesson this morning. So I don't have any real closing announcements other than I would say that one of the things Charlotte said, which makes me think back to the Cure book. If you haven't read, you should be, but your community of faith should be somewhere where you have enough trust to where you can walk into a room without judgment. And I hope that each one of you knows that on Tuesday morning when you walk in here, that we leave judgment at the door, because we're all going through different stuff. We've all got things that are going on. I think you've all noticed that in the small group discussions. We all probably have a very good mask on and look like we got it all together, but we all got stuff that's happening. So I hope you can continue to come here on Tuesday, share that with that burden off of your shoulders if you need to, and just find a place where you aren't judged and you're loved for the whole time you're here. And Rob, I think you're going to close us?
Hey guys, if you bow your head with me. Dear gracious and heavenly Father, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity every Tuesday morning to get together and learn from you through the experiences and words of others here in this room. It really does make me think that we have cultivated, started to maintain and live in such a good community here at Best Man. And hopefully this can give us an example of how we can do that in all areas of our life, not just here on Tuesday morning. So thank you again. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Great job, Charlotte.
Thank you.
They're still here. Yes.
Yeah.
I will get this more active. Supposed to be